Look what we have here. Another diversity placement fresh from basic, thinks she can handle the chimera. Kid, this simulator chews up kernels for breakfast and spits out their fillings. You sure you're in the right room, sweetheart? The words, slick with condescending certainty, echoed off the polished concrete of the advanced simulation chamber. A ripple of nervous laughter, the kind that seeks to align with power, spread through the gallery of seasoned Space Force pilots and hardened technicians. They were an audience of eagles, and a sparrow had just landed in their nest. The man who spoke, Master Sergeant Miller, was a fixture of this place, a gatekeeper whose approval was as coveted as it was rare. He stood with his arms crossed, a smirk plastered on his face, his entire posture a declaration of his own perceived superiority. He was the voice of institutional skepticism, the embodied assumption that worth was measured in years, rank, and volume. But the target of his derision, the young, black woman in a crisp but unadorned flight suit, offered no reaction. She didn't flinch. She didn't scowl. She didn't even meet his gaze. Her entire universe had contracted to the glowing datapad in her hands, her fingers swiping through pre-flight diagnostics with a placid, almost hypnotic rhythm. Her name, according to the duty roster Miller had barely glanced at, was Senior Airman Eva Rostova. She appeared unremarkable in every way. Average height, hair pulled back in a severe regulation bun, her face a serene mask of professional focus. She wore no patches of valor, no squadron insignia that spoke of past glories. She was a blank slate, and in a world built on reputation, a blank slate was an invitation for contempt. In the darkened observation gallery above, another figure watched, unnoticed by the crowd below. Admiral Thorne, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten wars and impossible decisions, leaned against the reinforced glass. He saw the scene unfold, the familiar, ugly pageantry of arrogance preying on perceived weakness. He saw Miller's chest puff out. He saw the pilots exchange knowing, dismissive glances. And then he saw her. He saw the senior airman's hands. He saw the utter lack of wasted motion, the balletic efficiency as she calibrated the simulator's haptic controls. He saw the way she held her spine, a perfect, unwavering column of discipline. He saw a stillness in her that was not born of fear or inexperience, but of something far older, far deeper. It was a calm that radiated from a core of absolute competence, a silence that was not empty, but full. While Miller saw a rookie, Thorne saw a predator conserving its energy. He had seen that same stillness before, in the moments before a door was breached, in the eyes of spies before they crossed enemy lines, in the quiet heart of a storm. It was a hallmark of the true professional, the quiet ones who carried the weight of the world without ever speaking of its burden. He remained silent, a ghost in the machine, content to let the simulation itself render the final judgment. Down on the floor, the challenge was laid, the gauntlet thrown. If you believe that true strength is forged in silence, type competence below. Master Sergeant Miller, emboldened by Rostova's lack of response, pressed his advantage. He sauntered over to the massive console that governed the simulator's parameters, his movements theatrical and designed for the audience. "All right, pilots, let's learn a lesson today," he announced, his voice booming through the chamber's comm system. "The lesson is about overreach. It's about knowing your limits. The Chimera isn't a game, it's a meat grinder. The scenario we'll be running today is designated Karen's Toll. It's a classic no-win situation." He gestured to the main holographic display, which shimmered to life, showing a dense, chaotic asteroid field swirling around a binary star system. "Your mission, Airman, is to pilot a lone XR-9 recon vessel through the field to retrieve a deep space probe. Simple, right?" He paused for effect, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Wrong. The probe is adrift in the system's primary gravity well. Your long-range sensors are offline due to solar interference. And, oh, did I mention the field is a graveyard? It's filled with derelict warships from the Outer Rim conflict, many of which still have active and very hostile automated defense systems. We've lost decorated captains in this sim. Men with thousands of flight hours. Men who knew what they were doing. The insult was clear, the implication sharp as a shard of glass. Rostova, however, continued her methodical preparation. She slid into the simulator's cockpit, the multi-layered canopy hissing shut and sealing her away from the noise and the prejudice of the room. Inside, she was surrounded by a symphony of light and data. Holographic displays flickered around her, projecting flight vectors, energy readings, and threat assessments. Her hands moved with a liquid grace, her fingers dancing across the control surfaces, not with the hesitant tapping of a novice, but with the intimate familiarity of a master musician playing a cherished instrument. The onlookers saw only a woman in a box. But inside that box, a profound connection was being forged between operator and machine. She wasn't just preparing to fly the simulator. She was communing with it. She ran a Level 3 diagnostic on the virtual engine core, recalibrated the maneuvering thrusters to a tolerance 3 decimal points finer than the factory default, and adjusted the pilot interface feedback to match her own neurological rhythms. These were not actions from a standard checklist. This was the work of someone who didn't just know the machine, but understood its soul. Miller, watching her on a secondary monitor, scoffed again. Look at her, playing with the settings. Probably try and find the difficulty slider. Another wave of sycophantic chuckles. He stabbed a finger at his console. Let's make this interesting. I'm enabling the cascade failure protocol. One critical hit, and your systems will start to short out one by one. Good luck. His finger hovered over the final button. Any last words, Airman? From the cockpit's internal speaker, her voice came, calm and utterly devoid of emotion. Ready when you are, Sergeant. The words were a simple statement of fact. Yet in the charged atmosphere, they landed like a stone dropped into a still pond, the ripples of its quiet confidence spreading outwards, a silent refutation of all the noise that had preceded it. The stage was set. The assumptions had been voiced. The trap was sprung, and the quiet professional was about to go to work. With a final, theatrical flourish, Miller slammed his hand down on the activation key. Engaging simulation. Karen's toll is live. Let's see what you've got, kid. The world outside the simulator cockpit vanished, replaced by the breathtaking, terrifying vista of the binary star system. 2 suns, one a brilliant white dwarf, and the other a bloated red giant, cast a perpetual, eerie twilight across a maelstrom of rock and twisted metal. Asteroids the size of moons tumbled slowly through the void, their pitted surfaces scarred by millennia of impacts. Between them drifted the skeletal remains of capital ships, their hulls breached, their weapon systems like silent, sleeping cannons waiting for a target. The sheer density of the debris field was a pilot's nightmare. It was like trying to navigate a hurricane made of mountains. For the first few moments, Rostova did nothing. Her small recon vessel, the XR-9, floated silently at the edge of the chaos. On the main screen in the control room, her ship was a tiny, green icon on the verge of being swallowed by a sea of red thread indicators. What's she doing? Frozen at the controls. Miller sneered, his commentary a constant, corrosive drip. This is where the rookies panic. They either punch the throttle and fly straight into an asteroid, or they try to turn back and fail the mission. But Rostova was not panicking. She was listening. Her eyes were closed, her head tilted slightly, as if she were sensing the invisible currents of the void. She was processing the storm, not with the simulator's limited sensors, but with an intuition honed in crucibles far deadlier than this one. Her hands rested lightly on the controls, feeling the faint, phantom vibrations of the simulated ship. She was reading the gravitational tides, mapping the complex dance of debris in her mind, building a 3-dimensional, dynamic model of the entire system. Then, her eyes snapped open. Her hands moved. It was not the panicked jerking of a novice, but the swift, decisive action of a surgeon making the first cut. The XR-9 didn't roar into the field. It slipped into it. It moved like a whisper, using short, precise bursts from its maneuvering thrusters to weave between the tumbling rocks. She didn't fight the gravity. She used it. She performed a series of micro-slingshots, borrowing momentum from one asteroid to fling her ship towards the next, conserving her fuel, minimizing her energy signature. On the control room screen, the pilots watched, their smug expressions slowly melting away, replaced by frowns of concentration. This was not the flying of a rookie. This was an exhibition of sublime control. It was astrogation as an art form. Pure luck, Miller muttered, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. As if on cue, the trap sprang. An automated proximity alarm blared through the cockpit. A derelict destroyer, its systems suddenly jolted to life, spat a volley of plasma bolts at her. The bolts were fast, their tracking algorithm designed to be inescapable. Evasive maneuvers were useless. But Rostova didn't evade. She accelerated directly towards the destroyer. It was a move so counterintuitive, so suicidal, that one of the pilots in the gallery gasped. For a heart-stopping second, it looked as if she was going to ram the warship. But at the last possible moment, she executed a perfect barrel roll, pulling her ship into the destroyer's structural blind spot, directly beneath its main command bridge. The plasma bolts, unable to alter their trajectory so sharply, sailed harmlessly past her and slammed into a nearby asteroid, vaporizing tons of rock in a silent, brilliant flash. The room was now completely silent. The pilots leaned forward, their eyes glued to the screen. Miller stood frozen, his hand hovering over the console, his smirk gone, replaced by a mask of disbelief. The Sparrow was flying like a hawk. The true test was yet to come. Having navigated the initial storm and outmaneuvered the first automated defense system, Rostova was now deep within the graveyard, approaching the primary gravity well where the probe was located. It was here that the simulation's true cruelty was revealed. The probe was caught in a decaying orbit around a pulsating neutron star fragment, a remnant of a long-dead supernova. This fragment emitted waves of electromagnetic interference, rendering her already degraded sensors almost completely useless. Worse still, the gravitational distortions were extreme, threatening to tear her small ship apart. This was the point of failure, the design dead end of the Karen's Toll scenario. The accepted wisdom was to abandon the probe and attempt to escape, a path that also led to mission failure, but preserve the pilot. Fighting through the interference to retrieve the objective was considered impossible. "Okay, this is it," Miller said, his voice now a quiet, analytical murmur, his role as tormentor forgotten, replaced by that of stunned observer. "There's no way to lock onto the probe with this much interference. She has to abort, but Rostova had no intention of aborting. Her mission was to retrieve the probe, and for a quiet professional, the mission is absolute." Her screens were a blizzard of static, the targeting computer flashing a constant stream of error messages. The ship groaned under the strain of the tidal forces. Instead of relying on the technology that had failed her, she fell back on the oldest tools of the trade, her eyes and her mind. She decoupled the flight controls from the main computer, shifting to full manual input, a feat akin to performing brain surgery with your hands tied behind her back. She was now flying the XR-9 entirely on instinct and raw skill. With the screens useless, she used the cockpit's small, unpowered viewport, tracking the probe's faint glint against the swirling chaos of the neutron star. It was a speck of light, a needle in a cosmic haystack. Then came the final, brutal twist. A swarm of autonomous mining drones, their programming corrupted by the derelict warships, activated and converged on her position. They were small, fast, and numerous, a cloud of angry hornets. The tactical display, what little of it was working, turned into a solid block of red. The pilots in the gallery recoiled. It was over. No one could survive that. No one. What Rostova did next would be spoken of in hushed, reverent tones at Vandenberg for decades to come. She didn't try to outrun the swarm. She didn't try to fight it. She did something that defied all known combat doctrine. She cut the power. Her entire ship went dark, every system save for minimal life support going cold. The XR-9 became a ghost, a dead stick, tumbling silently through the void. The drones, deprived of an energy signature to lock onto, buzzed around her in confusion. Using only the faintest whisper from her maneuvering thrusters, she nudged her dead vessel into a precise, calculated fall toward the neutron star fragment. She was using the deadliest object in the system as a shield. For a full minute, her ship was just another piece of debris, invisible, silent, and falling. Then, at the exact moment her trajectory intersected with the probe's orbit, she reignited her engines in a single, violent burst. The ship roared back to life. She snagged the probe with a tractor beam, fired her main thrusters, and used the immense gravitational pull of the star fragment to perform a slingshot maneuver of breathtaking audacity and precision. She was flung out of the gravity well and away from the drone swarm at an impossible velocity. On the main screen, a single line of text appeared, stark and green against the black. Mission complete. For 10 seconds, the control room was utterly, profoundly silent. It was the silence of shattered paradigms, the silence of witnessed impossibility. Then Miller, his voice a choked whisper, uttered the words that hung in the air for everyone. "No, that's not possible. The physics engine, it shouldn't even allow for that maneuver." The spell of silence was broken by the sound of a single pair of footsteps, measured and deliberate, descending the metal staircase from the observation gallery. Every head in the room turned. Admiral Thorne emerged from the shadows, his face calm, but his eyes blazing with an intensity that commanded absolute obedience. The pilots and technicians instinctively straightened up, some snapping to a clumsy form of attention. The Admiral's presence transformed the atmosphere from a technical debriefing into a court of judgment. He paid no mind to the stunned crowd. He walked past Master Sergeant Miller as if he were a piece of furniture, his gaze fixed on the simulator as the canopy hissed open. Eva Rostova emerged, her movements as unhurried and precise as they had been before she entered. She swung her legs over the side, her boots touching the deck with a soft, definitive sound. She showed no signs of elation, no flush of victory, no exhaustion. Her expression was the same placid, professional mask it had been from the beginning. She had not just completed a simulation. She had performed her function. Thorne stopped a few feet from her. He did not look at the mission results on the main screen. He did not ask for a report. He simply looked at her, his eyes taking in the quiet dignity, the unshakable composure. A flicker of recognition, of profound and sorrowful memory, crossed his face. He had seen her before, not in a training facility, but on the flickering tactical display of a flagship bridge during the darkest hours of Operation Silent Star. Her call sign a lone beacon of hope in a sea of overwhelming enemy forces. She had been a ghost then, a legend even among the select few who knew she existed. He turned his head slowly, his gaze finally falling upon the still frozen Master Sergeant Miller. The Admiral's voice was low, but it cut through the room like a laser. "Sergeant, bring up her service record. All of it." Level 5 clearance. Miller, jolted from his stupor, fumbled at his console. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by the pale, clammy fear of a man who suddenly realizes he has made a catastrophic, career-ending mistake. He typed in the Admiral's authorization codes. His hands trembled slightly. The file for Senior Airman Eva Rostova appeared on the screen. It was almost entirely blank, populated by placeholder data and low-level training assignments. That's all there is, sir," Miller stammered. "It's a standard recruit file." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "You use my code, Sergeant. Did you not see the secondary prompt?" He walked to the console himself and pointed a single, steady finger at a tiny, almost invisible icon in the corner of the screen. "Authorize Omega Protocol access." Miller, his face now ashen, clicked the icon. A new security gateway appeared, demanding biometric, voice print, and quantum key confirmation. Thorne leaned in, whispered a passphrase, and pressed his thumb to the scanner. The screen went black for a moment, and then a new file bloomed into existence, its header glowing with the crimson red of the highest security classification. The room held its collective breath. The truth was about to be revealed. The personnel file that filled the main screen was not a record of a career. It was the secret history of an era. The name at the top was the same, but everything else was a testament to a life lived in the shadows, at the very tip of the spear. The narrator's voice, now infused with a mythic reverence, could have read the lines aloud, each one a hammer blow to the foundation of Miller's arrogant assumptions. Rank, Senior Airman, Cover Assignment. The words hung in the air, a stark admission of deception. The Real rank was not listed, because ranks were insufficient to describe what she was. True designation: Commander, Project Chimera, Section 7. She wasn't a student of the simulator. She was its master, one of the original architects of its brutal logic, the ghost in its machine. Her call sign was listed simply as Nyx, the primordial goddess of the night. Combat hours: over 10,000 in deep space, zero-G hostile environments. A number so staggeringly high, it seemed like a typographical error. Most decorated pilots retired with a quarter of that. Medals and commendations: the Orion Cross with diamond clusters, awarded for actions during the Siege of Kepler, 186F. The Titan's Valor, for single-handedly disabling a rogue battle station at Proxima Centauri. The Silent Star Medal, unique commendation of which only one was ever awarded. All presented in classified ceremonies, their citations sealed for 100 years. The pilots in the gallery stared, their mouths agape. These weren't just medals. They were legends, whispered rumors of impossible heroism that they had assumed were mere myths to boost morale. They were looking at the living embodiment of those myths. Mission history: a long list of operations so secret that their names alone were classified. Operation Nightfall, Operation Cerberus Gate, Operation Karen's Toll, not the simulation, but the actual bloody conflict from which the scenario had been designed, a suicide mission for which only one pilot had returned. Her pilot, Eva Rostova. She had not just flown the simulation, she had survived the reality. The Rostova slingshot, the maneuver deemed impossible by the simulator's own physics engine, was impossible only because no one had ever thought to program it. It was her own signature move, an act of pure, desperate genius she had invented on the fly in a real battle to save her crew. She was here not for training, but for diagnostics, to test the simulator's limits against the only benchmark that mattered, her own. The revelation settled over the room, thick and heavy. The quiet airman was not a rookie. She was a legend hiding in plain sight, a queen disguised as a pawn. Admiral Thorne let the information sink in for a long moment. He then turned his back on the screen and faced Rostova directly. He straightened his uniform, his posture becoming ramrod straight. In a move that sent a shockwave of disbelief through every person present, the four-star admiral, commander of the entire sector fleet, brought his heels together with a sharp click and rendered a slow, perfect, formal salute to the woman wearing the uniform of a senior airman. His voice, filled with a respect that bordered on reverence, echoed in the stunned silence. "Commander Rostova, it is an honor to see you in action again. Request permission to debrief at your convenience." Rostova simply met his gaze and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Admiral," the single word was all that was needed. The validation was absolute. The humiliation of the ignorant was complete. The story of what happened in Simulator Chamber 4 became the stuff of instant legend. It didn't just spread, it detonated. It moved through the secure networks of Vandenberg Space Force Base like a cascading shockwave, transmitted in hushed, excited whispers in the mess halls, debated in encrypted forums by pilots across the sector, and recounted with ever-increasing embellishment by the technicians who had been there to witness it. The tale had all the elements of a modern myth: the unassuming hero, the arrogant gatekeeper, the impossible trial, and the stunning reveal by a figure of ultimate authority. The name Rostova became a verb overnight. To pull a Rostova meant to achieve a flawless, unconventional victory through sheer, understated brilliance. The phrase Karen's Toll was no longer a synonym for failure. It was now the name of the benchmark for excellence. The entire culture of the Advanced Training Wing began to shift, slowly but irrevocably. The swagger and loud boasts that had once dominated the ready rooms began to feel hollow, even childish. A new kind of currency was being minted, the currency of quiet competence. Pilots started talking less and studying more. They spent more time in the technical manuals and less time posturing. They began to understand that the deadliest weapon in their arsenal was not the firepower of their ship, but the disciplined mind of its pilot. Master Sergeant Miller became a ghost of his former self. His public humiliation was so total, so profound, that it seemed to have burned the arrogance right out of him. He was not officially reprimanded. Admiral Thorne knew that the lesson Miller had learned was more potent than any punishment he could mete out. For days, Miller avoided the simulation chamber, his shame a palpable aura. Then, one morning, he was seen waiting outside the debriefing room, where Commander Rostova was working with the simulator's engineers. He held 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He waited patiently, not speaking, until she emerged. He stepped forward, extended one of the mugs to her, and simply said, "Ma'am." His voice was quiet, stripped of all its former bluster. It was the first time he had ever addressed a subordinate officer, let alone an enlisted rank woman, with that title. Rostova took the mug, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. She gave him that same small, accepting nod she had given the Admiral. No words of forgiveness were spoken, because none were needed. The gesture was the apology. The acceptance was the absolution. From that day on, Miller was a changed man. He became the fiercest advocate for the quiet professionals, the first to defend a new trainee from the kind of mockery he himself had once championed. He never spoke of the incident directly, but he didn't have to. The memory of the Admiral's salute and the crimson-red file of a living legend was forever burned into his mind. He had learned the hardest lesson of his career, that you can't judge a weapon by its holster and you can't judge a warrior by their rank. The legend required artifacts, physical anchors, to tether the myth to reality. Within a week, they began to appear. The official data recording of Rostova's simulation run, a file that should have been archived under a generic training designation, was preserved by an anonymous technician. It was copied, encrypted, and distributed among the pilot community as the gospel. Watching the recording became a rite of passage for new aviators, a silent film that taught more about creative problem-solving and grace under pressure than any textbook ever could. The impossible maneuver, the dead-stick slingshot, was formally named the Rostova Gambit by the Academy's curriculum board. It was analyzed, deconstructed, and programmed into the Chimera simulator not as a bug to be fixed, but as a feature to be mastered, an Everest of piloting skill that only the very best would ever attempt to climb. In the simulation chamber itself, a more humble, more personal monument appeared. Taped to the side of the main console, right where Miller used to lean with his arms crossed in judgment, was a small, laminated printout of the final frame from Rostova's run. The words "Mission Complete" glowing in brilliant green. Below it, someone had typed a simple and signed addendum. Assumptions are the mother of all failures that serve as a permanent, silent rebuke to the arrogance that had once filled the room. But Rostova herself remained untouched by the growing mythos surrounding her. She deflected all praise, her focus remaining squarely on her work. She was seen not in the officers' club, accepting accolades, but in the quiet corners of the hangar, mentoring the next generation. She would find a young airman struggling with a complex astrogation problem and, without a word, tap a few commands into their datapad, revealing a simpler, more elegant solution. She would stand behind a nervous trainee in a low-level simulator, her calm presence a silent source of strength, offering a quiet word of advice. Don't fight the machine. Dance with it. Her philosophy was infectious. She taught that respect wasn't demanded. It was earned through flawless execution. She taught that confidence wasn't projected with a loud voice, but with steady hands. She was building a legacy not of personal glory, but of institutional excellence. The story of her vindication became more than just gossip. It became a parable, a teaching tool used by wise NCOs and officers to remind their charges that the most unassuming person in the room is often the most dangerous. The legend was no longer just about her. It was about the powerful, enduring idea she represented. It was a testament to the fact that in the unforgiving vacuum of space, or in the high-stakes pressure of military life, there is no substitute for quiet, demonstrated, irrefutable competence. A year passed. The seasons changed at Vandenberg, but the change within the culture of the advanced training wing was more profound and lasting. The ripples from that single day in the simulation chamber had spread out, transforming the very soul of the institution. The loud, arrogant swagger that had once been mistaken for confidence was now seen for what it was, a brittle shield for insecurity. A new ethos had taken root, one that prized precision over posturing and results over reputation. The Rostova Gambit was now the capstone exercise for every elite pilot graduating from the program. Most failed, but the attempt itself was transformative. It forced them to think beyond the manual, to see the rules not as constraints, but as tools to be bent and, when necessary, broken. It taught them that the most creative solutions are often born in the silent crucible of desperation. Master Sergeant Miller was now the head instructor of the Chimera program. He had been offered a promotion, a transfer, a chance to escape the sight of his greatest shame, but he had refused. He chose to stay, to stand as a living testament to the lesson he had learned. He was a better teacher for it, more patient, more insightful, more humble. He would often begin his orientation for new pilots by telling them the story of the day he mistook a lioness for a lamb. He never used Rostova's name, referring to her only as the commander, which only enhanced her mythical status. "I want you to look around this room," he would say, his voice low and serious. "Look at the person next to you. Don't look at their rank. Don't look at their record. Don't make a single assumption. In here, the simulator is the only judge, and it is a righteous and unforgiving God. It doesn't care about your ego. It only cares about what you can do." His words carried the immense weight of experience, the undeniable authority of a man who had been publicly and deservedly humbled. The legend of the Quiet Airman had become institutional dogma. Her story was no longer just a story. It was a foundational principle. It was a reminder that true strength isn't loud. It's effective. It's a reminder that respect is the natural consequence of competence. The change was visible everywhere. In the ready rooms, pilots now collaborated, sharing data and strategies instead of competing for bragging rights. In the debriefings, criticism was constructive, focused on performance, not personality. The entire program produced better pilots, not because the technology had improved, but because the philosophy had deepened. Rostova herself was long gone, reassigned to some new, classified project on the farthest frontier. She had left no forwarding address, no official photograph, nothing but the indelible mark she had made on the people and the place she had briefly touched. Her legacy was not a statue in a courtyard. It was the quiet confidence in the eyes of a young pilot successfully navigating a complex problem. It was the humility of a seasoned instructor guiding a trainee. It was the institutional understanding that the most valuable asset in any conflict is the disciplined mind, the calm heart, and the steady professional hand. True legacy is not found in the echo of a name, but in the continuation of a standard. It is not a monument carved from stone, but a principle woven into the fabric of a culture. Commander Eva Rostova's name might one day be lost to the redacted pages of classified history, but her impact would endure, a silent, powerful current guiding the institution she had so profoundly affected. Her story became a lesson passed down from one generation of pilots to the next, a piece of institutional folklore that served as both a warning and an inspiration. It warned against the poison of prejudice, the lazy arrogance of making judgments based on the superficial. It inspired a deep and abiding respect for the quiet professional, for the one who lets their actions speak for them, knowing that the truth of their skill requires no amplification. The core of the lesson was simple. Competence is its own credential. It needs no fanfare, no introduction, and no defense. It simply is. When faced with a true crisis, the loudest voice in a room is often the first to fall silent, while the quiet, focused individual who has spent a lifetime honing their craft becomes the center of gravity, the calm eye of the storm around which everything else revolves. This is the triumph of substance over style, of demonstrated ability over declared bravado. It is a timeless truth, as applicable in a corporate boardroom as it is in the cockpit of a starship. Assumptions are the currency of the ignorant, while observation is the tool of the wise. The greatest strength is often wrapped in the quietest package, and the most profound impact is often made by those who seek no credit. Eva Rostova sought no validation from Miller, no applause from the gallery. She sought only to complete her mission to the highest standard of her own impossibly high expectations. The respect she received was merely a byproduct of the excellence she embodied. The salute from the Admiral was not a gift. It was a debt being paid to a level of skill and dedication that transcended rank. This is the ultimate vindication, not to prove the doubters wrong, but to operate on a level where their opinions become entirely, wonderfully irrelevant. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud ignorance, and where silent discipline defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.